Merci d'être parmi nous. Bienvenue à Dissection Bharti Kher. Dissection, c'est une série d'événements présentés dans le cadre de notre programmation publique chez DHC Éducation. C'est une façon pour nous de susciter un dialogue interdisciplinaire, d'encourager un engagement renouvelé avec l'art contemporain. Et cette fois-ci, pour Dissection Bharti Kher, on a proposé une version ambulatoire de l'événement. Donc, lors d'une visite interactive, 3 invités entreront en dialogue avec certaines des œuvres de l'exposition Bharti Kher, point de départ, qui est présentée à la Fondation jusqu'au 9 septembre. Vous avez donc l'immense plaisir d'accueillir parmi nous Jacqueline Miller, Molly K. Shinhat et Yen-Chao Lin. Chacune des présentations dure environ 20 minutes. Les 2 premières présentations sont en anglais et la 3e sera en français. Ensuite, nous aurons une période de questions avec les 3 invités et un verre de vin qui sera offert par la suite dans le lobby de la galerie.
Okay. Hi everyone, welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us this evening. So our first presenter is Jacqueline R. Miller. Jacqueline is a biologist and a mammalogy technician for the Royal Ontario Museum. Miller's main interests include comparative morphology and anatomy, behavioral ecology and evolution. She obtained her MSc at the University of Toronto in the Department of Anthropology and pursued work as a PhD candidate in zoology. Her thesis work focused on vocal communication and its evolution in mice. At the ROM, she manages the mammalogy wet lab and maintains the mammal collection, overseeing the preparation, preservation, and conservation of all vertebrate material entering or held in the ROM's mammalogy collection. The largest specimen she's prepared was the ROM's blue whale heart, which was part of the recent exhibition, Out of the Depths, the Blue Whale Story. While a large part of Miller's time is spent on preparing skeletons and study skins, she also engages in fieldwork and participates in biodiversity surveys as well as collecting large assets for the ROM for their expanding marine mammal collection. So we're happy to have Jacqueline with us today. Our second presenter is Molly A.K. Shinhat. So British-born Molly A.K. Shinhat spent her childhood in Wolverhampton, England in the 1960s. A child of Punjabi Sikh immigrants, she was 4 years old when her MP, Enoch Powell, delivered his Rivers of Blood speech. Her mother wore saris to work pretty much every day, and her father always wore his turban. A teenager in suburban Montreal in the 1970s, later on, Molly would expand a modest sari collection of her own. Armed with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography, she lived in London, UK in Thatcher's twilight years before returning to Montreal, and she now lives in Ottawa. So we're really happy to have Molly with us today as well.
Et notre 3e invité est Yen-Chao Lin. Yen-Chao est une artiste multidisciplinaire basée à Montréal, commentant sur l'impermanence de l'existence à travers les stratégies du jeu, de la collaboration et de la fouille. Sa pratique explore l'histoire orale, les religions populaires, l'écologie et la permaculture sociale. Se décrivant comme une archiviste postmoderne et une passionnée d'histoire naturelle, elle collectionne avidement des registres de familles trouvées, des documents éphémères de l'époque victorienne et des spécimens biologiques. Les œuvres de Yen-Chao ont été présentées à Anti-Matters Media Art, au Festival du Nouveau Cinéma, chez Oboro, à Pop Montréal et à SBC Galeries d'art contemporain, entre autres. Avant de débuter, nous aimons prendre un moment pour remercier nos collègues de DHCR pour l'organisation de l'événement. Merci à Phoebe Greenberg et à Cheryl Sim, à Natacha Boucher, à Dalia Cheng et John Knowles, à toute l'équipe des préposés et Victoria Carrasco. Merci à Tania Gomez et un grand merci à Marie-Hélène Lemaire pour la coordination de cet événement.
Bonsoir, good evening. You can just call me Jackie, is fine. So I've been at the ROM in my official capacity as a technician for almost 5 years now, but I've been at the ROM as a student since my undergrad, so I've really been there for close to 25, 30 years. And what people may not know is even before that, and this kind of ties the whole story in, I had a background in healthcare and was for 25 years, superimposed on being a student, of course. I'm not that old. I was an emergency room nurse. And still maintain those credentials. So a lot of that comes to a head in this story. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is the odyssey of the ROM procuring the first specimen of its kind, the only one of its kind in the world, and that was a preserved blue whale heart. And this had to do with the fact that in 2014 there was a how many people remember the winter of 2014? Really, really cold, really icy. A lot of grids went down across Ontario and Quebec. The Great Lakes were almost completely iced over for the first time in several decades. And in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the amount of ice, when we were in Newfoundland, even the locals would say the bays would be iced over that had never, in their recollection, iced over before. So it was a terrible winter. And ice is not a friend to feeding whales. And in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, when late January, early February comes and the ice starts to break up and move around a bit, it becomes a bit of a grinder. In fact, the Cabot Strait has an area known as the Whale Cemetery, which is notorious for ice entrapments when the ice starts to move in the spring. So that particular year saw a tragic event where 9 blue whales were identified trapped and dead in the ice. And that's what we know was there. If anyone knows any history of the commercial whaling industry, blue whales were not originally a target because, like the fin whales, their relatives, and sei whales that they call rorquals or furrow whales, the ones that have these big pouches that expand under their chin to make a big engulfment event to swallow many thousands of tons of krill. The blue whales were fast, and the other thing was when they were harpooned, they would sink. They wouldn't float, unlike some of the other whales that were the target of the commercial whaling industry. But when the right whales were all gone, they started to look at blue whales and fin whales to supplement that industry. So the event in 2014, there were 9 that were in the ice. We don't know if there were more. And this was significant because the North Atlantic population of blue whales is a unique genetic, we believe it's a unique genetic distinct population. And numbers are estimated anywhere from 250 to 450 individuals in the Canadian waters. And so 9, particularly when a number of them were females, that was a significant blow. Significant also because for anyone in biology circles, a loss of a female is a loss of a potential 10 other individuals or even more, because you're not just losing that individual, you're losing all the consecutive offspring that she could be bringing into the gene pool. So it was a really tragic event. And so it just so happens at this time, and I was actually only on, this was my first field job in that year at the museum. I'd been employed there officially for 1 month. And my background, I worked on mice in my thesis. Yeah, I knew a lot about mouse anatomy, and I knew a lot about human anatomy. I didn't know anything about whale anatomy. So my boss, I got this phone call one Thursday. They'd gone out to check out the first whale that had been towed into Newfoundland. And I got this phone call saying, okay, pack your suitcase because I may want you to go out. We may get a chance at a second whale. And by the way, you may have to take out a heart. So I thought, okay. So I packed my bag, and the next day off I was in Newfoundland, and with this daunting task. And it was interesting because most whales that die on beach, most necropsies of whales that are conducted to try to find out why they died, most of the veterinarians there will tell you that the organs don't survive. Whales are very large, they have a lot of fat, and what happens as the sun beats down on them is that starts to heat up and they basically start to boil. And they generate a lot of heat and a lot of gas, and they decompose really, really quickly. So the chance that you would have a heart that was intact enough that you could preserve it was very small. And most necropsies, they'll estimate that the loss of mass of the heart is upwards to 90%. So not much to work with. And you can't really, even with formalin fixation, once something's gone and decayed, you really can't bring it back. So we were very lucky with the second whale that I was called out to work on at Rocky Harbor. She did not sink. She stayed in the ice, and she was moving around in that churning ice from probably February, roughly where she would likely died, to the end of April, where she started to move towards Newfoundland, and actually then just did float into Newfoundland. We did have to relocate her to an area that was less populated. Dead whales are not a very popular thing on most coastal communities. They have a funny smell. And so So she had been in the refrigerated Atlantic waters for a lot longer than the first whale, and we thought this might afford a good opportunity, a good chance to actually get some other specimens, some organ specimens intact. And we were very, very lucky. When we actually got into the whale, got as far up as the thoracic cavity, the heart was intact. It looked like it hadn't lost a great deal of mass. And it really did. We had some veterinarians from some specialists from the States up with us at the time, and it really looked like we'd have a good chance at trying to get it out. It was actually a veterinarian in the States that was going to extract the heart from me. Unfortunately, he had to leave the day before we actually had a chance to do that. We were far enough into the whale dissection to do that. So I was left to figure that out on my own. And pretty much that meant wearing hip waders, elbow gloves, and up to my knees in a pool, trying to find where the blood vessels start and where they end, and to make sure I dissected in a way that the specimen would be intelligible once we got it out and preserved it. So it was quite a daunting task, but we were successful. We did manage to get, this was the heart actually in the thoracic cavity. I can send that around. So it doesn't look like much. It just looks like a pink gray ball. And when we got it out and actually got to the stage where we brought it back to a facility in Trenton, Ontario to do the first stage of preservation, which is to arrest decay, formalin fixation. And this is actually in the process of formalin fixation. So we were very lucky. And so what we had to do to actually preserve it with formalin was you want it, the heart, whale hearts are very flat, incredibly flat. So I'm going to actually send around another picture because this just shows us occluding some of the blood vessels so that we could preserve, but you get a sense there of this pancake on a table. And that's exactly what they are. And it's interestingly because when Bharti was doing the research to create this was before, long before we had recovered the first heart specimen that's actually available to study. So certainly there are heart specimens of other whales, but they're much smaller and they don't have the same interesting characteristics of being very wide and very flat and very sided, where there's a distinct left and right side. Our hearts, I'm going to show you another neat thing. This is very similar to a human heart. This is a real heart, by the way. And we're going to get into this because this is a plastinated heart. This is a pig's heart. And as you can see, just like our heart, it's very conical. Our hearts are rather circular. It is called a spiral arrangement. So really the right side kind of envelops the left ventricle, and when it contracts, it's almost like a wringing out of clothing. So what you see in the great whales is actually a sidedness that you think about in textbooks where there should be a left and a right atrium and ventricle. And it's there, and why it's like that, why it's arranged like that, we have no idea. Why it's so flat dorsoventrally or front from the back, we have no idea. And why you actually, instead of our hearts just having a single point, you actually have two corresponding to each ventricle, two apices, we don't know why either. And another interesting thing, and is captured, and I was actually fascinated because it's captured in this sculpture, is the one characteristic that is really quite unique, and that's the size of the right side of the heart, which should be smaller than the left side. The left side's the heart, the part that pumps everything to your body. It's really muscular, very powerful. The right side just receives stuff from the body to go to the lungs to get oxygen and come back. So to see a right side of the heart as massive, if not more massive than the left side, is really quite profound, because in a human being, that person would ultimately have pulmonary disease. They couldn't have a heart like that without having some resistance from the respiratory bed, causing the right side to get really, really big. So that was very fascinating. So I'm going to pass this around for a couple of reasons, really neat. We'll also get into this. We had a lot of international collaboration on this project just because it was like new territory for so many people. So one of our collaborators was the von Higgins family in Germany, who many of you will probably know from Body Works and Body Worlds. The originators of the process of plastination, and this is one of their specimens actually that they gave us just to have to show folks. So I'll pass that around. I can put half going your way. We'll send half going this way. And there's nothing noxious in this, but it is a real heart. That's real tissue that has been plastinated. And I'm going to get into that process in just a minute. So we got this specimen back, and we managed to get enough formaldehyde. By the way, that was about 2.2 100 liters, 2,200 liters of formaldehyde as the residual bath. And we changed that bath 3 or 4 times in the process. That's a lot of formaldehyde, pretty noxious. I don't know, anyone watches BBC? They had a special a while ago called The Hunt. There was a vignette in there on the blue whale, and there was a smaller vignette that I was in because they came to Canada to see our blue whale heart, and they had me go into a 6 by 6 by 5 vat of formaldehyde with the heart in my hip waders and my little mask to show people anatomy. That was my crazy science moment. So, yeah, and I'm still alive. So if anyone's probably remember your biology, most fixed specimens don't look like much. They're a little thing in a jar. They kind of look bleh. This is sort of, okay, that is a frog or that is a heart or whatever. And you kind of say, oh yeah, I guess I get that. But they're distorted. They're distorted because they're fixed in whatever way they were introduced into the solution. So what you want to do with a heart is you have to dilate it back to its full diastole, its full inflated size, and fix it in that state so that when you actually then go to the next step to plastinate it, you've got something that actually looks like a heart and blood vessels positioned where they're supposed to be. So what we had to do, and I think that picture is circulating around, is we had to occlude all of the vessels that go to the heart except 2, one to the right side, one to the left side. So once the heart has totally stopped up, you start filling those 2 sides with formaldehyde, and eventually the whole thing expands, and eventually, hopefully like a big beach ball, you get to a certain size. You stop those up and you just let it fix. Unfortunately, the heart had some holes and some rents. I mean, it was a necropsy, so there was a bit of damage. So we had to basically create an ongoing fountain of formaldehyde percolating through 2 pumps into both sides to keep it dilated as it fixed. And it took about 6 months to fix. So once that's done, plastination. Okay, plastination is an interesting process. What it does is it displaces all of the fluid in a tissue with a polymer. Now, how do you do that? Well, first of all, you want to get something that can be replaced. So you dehydrate the heart. You take that formalin fixed specimen, you start putting in acetone. And acetone, like alcohol, will draw water off. So you just keep changing that acetone until it's no longer diluting itself, and you know you've drawn all the water off and exchanged it with acetone as deep as you can go into the tissues. So once you have this acetone saturated specimen, you take that, you pop it back in your vat, you fill it up with silicone, and then to get that silicone to displace the acetone, acetone is neat because it has a vapor pressure of about 15 to 30 millimeters of mercury. So if you drop your pressure that low, acetone will start to evaporate. So what you do is you're going to do this under a vacuum. So you take your chamber with you take your vat with your heart in silicone, and you put in a vacuum chamber. And atmospheric pressure is about 760 millimeters of mercury. So then you seal the chamber and you start to bring that pressure down until it gets to almost 0. Then the acetone starts to boil away. And because you're in a vacuum, that space now is sucking up the silicone. Now here's the one problem. A vacuum chamber that size is about the size of a small spaceship. So what's the one big risk of vacuum, if anybody's worked in a biology lab? Implosion. Yeah, you don't want an implosion event, something that big, because thankfully it was all done in Germany, and it would be their facility that would melt down into a little bubble. But yeah, so that was a really tricky thing. And by the way, the acetone, to dehydrate that, 22,000 liters. Now, acetone is not a nice chemical. It's flammable. It's explosive. So there were lots of explosive stuff in this project that I wasn't really comfortable with. But you know, the Von Hagens have done this with large specimens. They were the pros, and we were there through several junctures to discuss how things were going along. And that whole process took about 2 years. So after you've got polymer saturated, now what you just have to do is cure the specimen, harden it, and shape it the way you want, and then maybe dissect it a little bit. So originally, the whole point that we were going to have for this specimen was we wanted something to say, how big is it? So we wanted the whole specimen, nothing fancy, just a heart that we can put beside our skeleton in our exhibition and say, this heart belongs to that whale and it's this big. but it really doesn't speak well to people. And really, I credit Vladimir Chernynsky, who is one of the chief anatomists at the Von Hagens, for wanting to do some dissection. And he would take the epicardium and he would take back a little strip. We'd already injected color polymers into the blood vessels, so he'd show us, this is really nice, shall I do some more? And I kind of cringed and said, oh, I don't know how much we want to take, but that looks really pretty. So they would do a little bit more. So I finally said, do what you think is necessary. And this is how he did this. And if you have a chance later, there's actually a front and a back to this. And this is almost to scale. I'd say this is about 90% scale. So this is what we know of a real blue whale heart. Up until this point, the popular literature would have you think the blue whale heart in somewhere the weight of a ton to a ton and 1.5 metric tons, the size of a family sedan. Lots of quotes out there about being able to swim down blood vessels. Yeah, we actually had a little Smart for Two car in our exhibition that we sort of clothed like a heart to show, see, it's not even quite that big. And on the wheels of the car, we had an image of a little baby crawling in and crawling out to look like the blood vessels, because that's pretty much what we figured could happen. You might be able to get a child crawl inside one of them, but you certainly weren't going to go swimming. So this was really new information for us. Now, I will put a caveat on that. The North Atlantic blue whales are smaller by about 15% than the big blue whales that inhabit the Pacific around the Antarctic. But even so, if you add on, you incorporate that, you're still not getting as big a specimen as you thought you would find. And in fact, they've known about this for a long time, because some of the early cetacean biologists that worked in the commercial industry had noted that there was something unusual with the great whales in their hearts, in that a land mammal, scaling of the heart mass would be about 0.5 to 1% of body mass. And in seals and small porpoises and such, it'd be about the same. But you got to the great whales and all of a sudden you're scaling 0.3 to 0.5, much less for the whole size of the animal. And again, this brought us, why? And there are biologists today still working on this question. But so when we decided to incorporate this as a specimen to put into our exhibition, as well as keep it as a scientific specimen, we wanted to maintain certainly information that scientists could study, but we also wanted to reveal something about it that was more alive, that was more animated, that would resonate more with people coming to see it, that would make them more curious. Hence, it's not so much artistic license as it is just artistically presented. And that, I think, is a very important feature in trying to bring conservation issues and such to the public and try to get them interested. One of the things that I find remarkable now that I've given this is the second time I'm giving this talk, and I've looked at the sculpture more closely, is something that does resonate with me and was very important in our exhibition, was this idea of awe and idea of aloneness. Blue whales have lost the vast majority of their population. They're facing risks right now that are threatening their longevity as a species. Some of them are not what you would think. Blue whales, we often wonder, do whales move in pods? Blue whales seem to be solitary, but blue whales communicate at frequencies that are very low over great distances. So I have to recreate in your mind what society for a blue whale means. That to communicate may not be, your swimming mate next to you, but maybe over hundreds of kilometers. And their vocalizations are infrasonic. You can't hear them, the frequencies are too low. You might hear some of the harmonic structure of it, but it carries vast distances. And one of the big problems, actually the biggest problem facing cetacean survival for any species right now is thought to be noise in our waters. And it's a big problem. And with the blue whales, we're finding that they can't hear over those long distances as once they could. So when we mounted this in the exhibition, one of the things that I was drawn to was this kind of a sadness, that it's a lone specimen. It's one heart beating of thousands. And interestingly, in the sculpture, I see aspects of that, because I see this one great object of the greatest thing that has existed on Earth, and it's you can see, well, at least to me, it's losing its life. There's very little that's still animated and red and pulsing through it, and it's the one thing in this room. And that connected to me, that connects me back to this fundamental problem that we have in trying to get a message across to help conservation efforts is this great aloneness, this vastness of the oceans, and how few many of these species are. That said, this was also an opportunity for us to bridge the gap of hard science, of natural history science, with cultural science, with cultural exploration and art. And you can't, and I firmly believe you lose nothing from a scientific perspective by giving it an appearance that not only looks more realistic, looks more animated, looks more interesting and tantalizing, but that actually, as a plastinated specimen, as you saw with the heart going around, you can get close to and touch and not just observe in an inanimate amorphic form in a bottle, which I think is a great move in science. And I think I'm going to cut it off there with one little anecdote I will say, because I mentioned this, for me, this was a big odyssey of going from mouse to whale or mouse to elephant. We heard lots of comparisons like that. So I had to plastinate some mouse hearts. So I'm going to pass this around. These are my two plastinated mouse hearts. Thank you.
Hello everybody, bonjour, sat sri akal. My name is Molly Amoli, and I'm a writer, and I was invited to come here today to talk about some ways you could look at Bharti Kher's work. There are several things she and I have in common in broad strokes. Like her, I was also born and brought up in Britain around the same time, a little bit older than Bharti. And, but I was born into a fairly small town in central England. And, you know, but like her, my mother ended up owning a clothing shop. She made her own clothing as well that she sold into the store when she no longer was getting promoted. And Bharti's mother had a similar experience. That was quite a common strategy for people of South Asian ancestry who were professionals who hit a ceiling at that time. They basically decided to cut their losses and started their own businesses. That was very much my mother's case, like Bharti's mom. I would say, though, in broad strokes, the big difference between Bharti Kher and his life growing up and mine is that I was born up and brought up in a very working class family. Anybody here has seen Coronation Street? That was the kind of house that I was born in and brought up in. That's the kind of neighborhood I was brought up in. So just to give you in broad strokes, those are the similarities and differences. So I want to one of the motifs I want to take from Bharti's work that I think is a very powerful one, which is why I was so thrilled, why I was asked to speak in this room in particular, is the sari, of course, which as you see I'm wearing as well, and it features in these two works right here. And if you had a chance to check out the rest of the exhibition, there is a section of the ones that are presented with what look like plinths or out of wood or concrete, with saris coated in varnish around them. So the sari is one of the most ancient garments in the world. The first known mention of a sari, or the first, they can trace their history to 3,000 years before the Christian era. So we're talking about this garment right here is about 5,000 years old, according to what we are able to trace. So, and the earliest known depiction of a sari in art or in culture is this man right here from the Indus Valley civilization or Harappa culture. I'm going to pass this around. And this little piece of sculpture here dates to around 3,500 or 1,700 BCE. So we're not talking about folks who were, we're talking about a garment that, again, I just want to impress upon you how old this garment is. So the other thing I want to tell you about in context of the age of the garment itself is one of the oldest stories about saris, which comes from the Mahabharata. Some of you here may have heard of that literary work. It's the world's longest poem. It's over 100,000 stanzas. Part of the Mahabharata contains the Bhagavad-Gita, which is one of the holy books of people who follow the Hindu faith. And so I'm going to tell you the story that's taken from the Mahabharata that features a sari. And it's one of the most well-known stories from that epic poem. The Mahabharata, to those of you who are less familiar with it, is basically a family feud. It's a story of two parts of the same family at war with each other. They happen to be cousins. One side is called the Pandavas, which is 5 brothers, and the other side, which is about 100 demons, they're called the Kauravas. And through a series of events, which I won't get into because it'll take a long time, obviously, they end up deciding that to decide who inherits the kingdom, they're going to have a game of dice. So Yudhishthira, who is the eldest of the Pandavas, he decides he's lost his kingdom in this gambling match, and he decides he's going to stake each one of his 4 brothers, and he loses all of those throws as well, and then he decides he's going to stake their wife, Draupadi, and this is where the story truly begins. Basically, when he stakes their wife, Draupadi, he loses that throw. And Duryodhan, who is the leader of the Kauravas, he says to his younger brother, Dushant, he tells him to go and get Draupadi and to bring her so that she can sit on his thigh. So he wants to assert his dominance, or in a way a kind of ownership of this woman, because he now considers himself the king of the kingdom, right? Because he's won, this gambling match. So Dushant goes off. Try and put yourself into this palace. Dushant goes off into this palace and finds Draupadi, who's not dressed for public space, which is where this gambling match is taking place. And he basically drags her out of there by the hair, right? Her hair is not fully dressed, it's loose. And he drags her by the hair to this place where they're having the gambling match. And once she arrives there, Draupadi addresses the Pandav's guru who is there. His name is Bhisham. And he says, by what right does Yudhishthira stake me as a bet? How can Yudhishthira, even though he's one of my husbands, how can he gamble me away, in a game of dice? How could this happen? And she talks about dharma, this idea of duty, and again, a very ancient idea in Indian culture, and asks the elders that are present there how they can tolerate, a gambling match where people are being gambled away, right, are being put down as stakes. And finally, she's waiting for one of her 5 husbands to speak up for her. And the only one that does is Bhima. And Bhima says, the first person that violates our wife, I'm going to kill him by smashing his thighs. That's what he says. So Dushant then starts to disrobe Draupadi, who's dressed in a sari, not unlike this, right? And he pulls at the pallu, which is this part of the sari. He pulls at this and she starts to turn around like this because he's pulling at it, right? Put yourself in this place. She's twirling around because he's pulling so hard at the sari to try and pull it off her so he can rape her, basically. And Draupadi realizes that none of the 5 husbands that she has are going to save her. So she decides that she's going to pray to Krishna. Krishna, by the way, is an avatar of Vishnu, who's the god of preservation, or the conserver. So she prays to his avatar, who is Krishna, and Krishna hears her prayer, and he decides he's going to help her. He is going to help her. And can anybody here who doesn't know the Mahabharata guess how he helps her? Yeah, he basically, so you obviously know the story. Oh, you don't? Okay, well anyway, that's a really good guess. That's a brilliant guess. That's a brilliant guess. He makes the sari endless so that Draupadi cannot be disrobed, so her honor is preserved, and basically Dushyant stops trying to unravel the sari from exhaustion. So here's, of course there are all kinds of depictions of this scene, but here's one of them. And here is Krishna in the top corner here. I'll pass this around in a second. And he's basically, you can see he's extending the sari. And here's Dushyant pulling on the other end, and here's the pile of the sari. So this is how Draupadi is saved from that fate. And so I wanted to share this story because unlike the saris you see here, which to me, actually this could also be part of Draupadi's story, but obviously the sari would go on, right? But I wanted to tell a story about the sari as preserver, the sari as protector of a woman's honor and of her safety. In this case, okay, it took divine intervention, but basically it was the sari that saved Draupadi, right? So that's... Now, sari, I think people sometimes stereotype them as being something that's only for special occasion, like when you're giving art talks, or I don't know, some special dinner or this or that. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the sari in day-to-day life. So it's basically a garment that's worn by millions of women all over the world, across the diaspora, the people of Indian ancestry all over the world. It is traditionally a single piece of woven cloth, typically between 6 to 9 yards long. I think it's important to note that, or to understand as well, that certainly within India or South Asia, the majority of saris that are worn by women who live in rural parts of the country, because that's where most of the population is based. 70% of people who live in India today don't live in cities. And so typically, because they are so poor, a lot of these people, they would not be able to afford a piece of woven cloth. They could only afford a printed piece of polyester that is 6 yards long, right? So, and as an example of that, I want to show you, this is a woman construction worker who's on a construction site. She's wearing a sari, as you can see, and she's got an additional piece of fabric, this scarf or a chunni, that she's used to carry her baby, her infant baby. So, saris are worn in all kinds of professions and fields of work. I'll pass this on this side. And they can be made of silk. Some people who sell saris, to show that their silk is so fine, they will take a ring off their hand and draw the whole sari through the ring to show you how fine the silk is. Saris are made of wool, of cotton, and in the context of cotton, I do want to also mention that during the movement for Indian independence from British colonialism, khadi, or hand woven and hand spun cotton, was a huge part of the movement to free India from British imperialism. And part of the sari was a part of that movement, because cotton saris that were worn by women participating in that movement were made of hand-woven cotton that was grown and spun by hand in India, not in the mills in Lancashire and Britain. So it was not part of the triangular trade. It was deliberately kept back, woven by Indian people, giving Indian people jobs, bringing all that money that was spent over there back to our country, or I'm saying our country, I wasn't born in India, as you know, but anyway, brought back to India and kept in India. So that's an important point to make here. Also, I want to mention there are regional variations in saris, the fabric, the patterns, the colors. There are hundreds of ways to tie saris, part of which I will demonstrate later. And I also just want to mention that certainly, I mean, more recently this has changed, but certainly in the last few years, saris in India in the urban centers kind of fell out of favor. Aspirational dress has always been Western dress. So if you wanted to show people, if you live in the third world in particular, if you want to show people you arrived, you wouldn't show up to work like in a sari. You would show up in, I don't know, a Ralph Lauren dress or a wool blend suit or you know, whatever. You would show up in the Western clothing to show that you had, I guess, left all this behind. So I kind of want to circulate these as well to show the reverse. This is part of the designer Marchesa's collection for 2013. And as you can see, certainly the figure in blue pretty much is wearing what I'm wearing, right? Except it's a designer called Marchesa who happens to live in Europe and makes all their money. And these are clearly based on saris, right? So just to show that one. And this is the Giorgio Armani collection for 2009. And this, you can see, has dhotis in it. And some of these men are wearing bindis, which is also something that Bharti Kher is using in terms of her iconography and her work. So I'm going to pass that around to you as well. So, I wanted to, and the reason I'm showing you that is because I think it's important to understand that in India, which is a very much a post-colonial society, you know, and when we look at Bharti Kher's work as an artist who lives in India and has lived in India most of her adult life and is working in India, you know, it's interesting to look at what the culture valorizes. You know, fairness cream is still sold in India and colorism still exists in India. So by that account, because I'm darker than my biological sister, I would be considered less beautiful than her, right? By those measurements or whatever you want to say with respect to that. So, and another thread I pulled out of Bharti Kher's work is that she talks a lot about saris in domestic spaces. And again, I'm going to refer to the staircase and the upturned chair, because to me, some of these pieces definitely speak to the idea of domestic violence, which again goes back to Draupadi's story. Even though she was saved and she was a queen and she was in a palace, but she experienced domestic violence, and she experienced, in my opinion, that was an attempted rape. That was an attempt to disrobe this woman and violate her. I mean, I appreciate its mythology, but that's what they were trying to do. So again, we have a piece behind you here with the shattered glass and the blood. And this one here with the sari sort of frozen in time. Personally, I find in terms of the way I was brought up, you know, my mom, both my parents, I mean, I think immigration or migration is very much, for anybody, it's going to be about what you hold on to and what you leave behind, what kind of choices you make in your day-to-day life around those issues. I didn't feel this way at the time, but I think it's incredibly courageous that my parents made the choice to hold on to certain aspects of their ethno-cultural identity, like food, like clothing, like language. I mean, I apparently used to speak fluent Punjabi until I started going to school in England, and then it pretty much fell away. Most of it fell away. But I think that takes some courage in retrospect now, thinking about that. But I wanted to say a couple of words too about what it was like to grow up at that time in the 60s in a small town in Britain. There was a lot of racial violence. Enoch Powell was very much someone who was an anti-immigration politician, and much of what he was trying to do was trying to I mean, he said it in his Rivers of Blood speech, was to reverse immigration, even though Britain was experiencing a labor shortage. So the fact that my mom would wear saris pretty much all the time when she was a teacher at colleges and schools, and my dad always wore a turban. I mean, that was a religious thing. You know, when I look back on that now, that's pretty astounding that they did that. And yet the house that they bought, the Coronation Street house that I was born in and brought up in, there was a petition on the street to stop my parents from buying that house because we were the first people of color to buy property on that street. That's how things were going on in Wolverhampton. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit because I do understand Bharti experienced some of this herself, albeit in a different class context. But I do want to speak a little bit about internalized racism because I absolutely experienced that at that time, and it took many years to unravel how that affected me, since it was overlaid with racial violence as well. I think that I remember being at university, for instance, and working on the university paper, and seeing this cartoon that showed neo-colonialism and colonialism. And in the colonialism one, it had a white stick figure shooting a black person. And in the neo-colonialism one, it was the same two figures, but this time the black person was shooting themselves. This very much, I very much identified with that as an experience, because I certainly recall very deeply being ashamed of my family and ashamed of my skin color and the clothing that my parents would wear all the time, because it made us stand out even more. And I want to relate this aspect of violence to the sari in India, because today and for many years the sari has been used as a weapon against women in dowry burnings. And just in terms of research I did for this talk today, I discovered that in 2012, 8,233 women were killed in dowry burnings in India, according to India's own National Crime Records Bureau. So that actually is almost 1 woman an hour for the year of 2012. So that's an astonishing number of women, young women, who are killed, you know, in probably appalling circumstances. And this is across class, ethnicity, and region. I think it's important to note as well that originally, like in my mother's generation, dowries were things like 22-karat gold jewelry that you were given, that if your husband predeceased you or you were in some kind of exigent circumstance, you could sell this jewelry to take care of yourself or to protect your children. But with the economic and social changes that have happened in India within the last, I would say certainly 50 years, I mean, not that it didn't exist before, but it has been an increase. And part of that, some people suggest, I mean, I don't know the reality, but some people suggest that part of the reason this has increased is because the sense of materialism, you know, people wanting more things and wanting more expensive things has increased. So, you know, some people see this as a way to acquire things, right? You can marry multiple times if your wife keeps dying, and you can, you know, and so the connection to the sari as well is that apparently in a number of cases, quite a few cases, the way people will murder the woman is dress her in a nylon or polyester sari because they burn faster, and then they disguise it as a kitchen fire. That's happened thousands of times apparently. So, you know, I want to show that saris have many meanings and many, you know, as a symbol it's shifting all the time. More recently, I want to end on a positive note. Apparently, women in urban India are returning to the sari. They're trying different ways of tying it. There are already hundreds, but now with Indian fashion designers re-examining the sari. They're looking at different ways to tie it and using different types of blouses. And then you have these women here, the Khalaby Squad. These are women in one of the main central provinces in India, in Uttar Pradesh. They number in the hundreds of thousands. And this is, I wouldn't describe it as a vigilante group, but this is a group of women who have decided to take back ownership of the protection of women because of the corruption of the police in India, which is fairly widespread. And so they will get pretty heavily involved in situations where if they hear that a woman is being either abused by her husband or has been attacked, either in terms of legal work or actually, you know, in certain cases physically jumping into that situation. So that's, and of course everybody looks great in pink. What's not to like about pink? And then I wanted to also show you this one. This one is from the 70s and 80s, the Sari Squad in Britain. These were British Asian women, some of whom likely would have been first-generation immigrants or the eldest children of first-generation immigrants who would go to anti-deportation demos or anti-racist demos or to support the labor movement for Asian workers in Britain, dressed in saris and call themselves the Sari Squad. So they developed quite a reputation. Maybe this would be used to circulate. And part of the way they would generate news coverage was people would wonder what kind of saris they'd be wearing at their next demo, you know? So I want to say a big thank you to DHC Arts and to Cheryl Sim for inviting me, and to the Education Department for all their patience with my many questions and helping me figure out how I was going to do this. And I also want to thank my Mataji, my mom, because through preparing for this presentation, we talked about a lot of stuff I don't know if we would have revisited after all this time. And I want to ask for a volunteer, male or female. I'd like to demonstrate tying a sari on somebody who's here today. Who would like to volunteer? Anybody? Come on, Dan! Yay! Thank you. Hi, what's your name?
I'm Cedric.
Cedric,
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Cedric. So I'll put this over here, and I'll let you can put this either over your head or put it on from the bottom,
Okay,
whichever
yeah.
way you would like.
Okay, can I do it with my shoes?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. Go for it. Yeah, no,
Right?
let's go. But just so you know, men do wear saris as well. Typically it's priests. It's in the priest. They will tie it in a different way so it looks almost like pants. And the borders you see here, this would go like this, so it's like curved, but anyways, different
Is it curved now?
No, this is a petticoat. So I won't do this myself for obvious reasons, but I'll let you tie this as tight as you feel comfortable.
Sure, thank you.
Fairly tight. You need it fairly tight because you have to hold this sari up.
Okay.
So if you can pull the knot to the side.
Actually, I will do it again.
Okay. Here you go. And then I'll need you to pull the creases over like this. So you pull that over to that side or whatever.
Right.
And then you push the knots through the gap.
Like this?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
You're a fast learner, which is good.
I'm glad.
We don't need L plates here, thank you. So here we're going to take the end. So Cedric, I'm going to come around you like this. So excuse my hands here. You can let that go.
Oh, okay. I can let
You
go.
can let that go. So
Right.
here we go. So you can tuck this in now, Cedric.
Okay, what?
You can tuck it in.
Okay.
Tuck it into the center. Okay, this needs to be a little bit long.
Sure.
Because you're a tall guy.
Yeah.
There you go.
How am I flying tall?
And then if you just want to show people well, not
Sorry. Okay.
not too much twirling.
Okay, so you want me to twitch a bit?
No, you're good,
I feel like a ballet dancer should be like.
No, you don't
No,
need to
okay.
dance yet. Just hold on to your horses there. 1 second
I
here.
don't want to.
Okay. And because you're tall, this will go down to about here.
I feel like a bit like Greek more than.
Well, guess where they got some of their ideas. We have a few more gray hairs than those guys. Okay, so here we go, and then this side.
Where did that go?
If you can tuck this here.
Sure.
So now you see here, you can see the shape, right? Starting to take shape here. Because Cedric is tall, so it's a little bit tricky here. Sorry, Cedric. Mind my fingers.
I'm sorry.
See here. So we have the palla, which is this part. This is the part that Dushyant would have pulled, right, to disrobe. He would have gone like this, like that, and twirled her around like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is one. So that everybody's connecting the dots.
And you would do it from behind, so it'd be kind of surprised too, right?
There might have been an element to that. Depends, I guess, on the telling. And then this part here is for the pleats. You see? So, Cedric, I'll need your help.
Oh, okay.
You'll need to hold the material here.
Right, this, like this?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. Actually, we're going to make these slightly narrower. So, in these, again, you know, that's the great thing about this, is it's a living garment. Everybody ties it slightly differently. Every time you put it on, it's slightly different, right? So, even though it's thousands of years old, each time you put it on, it's unique. Because it's never going to be exactly the same. You're doing a great job here, Cedric.
Well, thank you.
You know, we could probably find you a part-time
I don't usually dress like this, so.
Okay, so I'm going to let you tuck this in the front.
So you want me to tuck it?
Tuck it in the front, just
inside?
straight like that, yeah.
Okay.
Just, yeah,
What do you mean?
at that height, just tuck it in. Tuck this end in the front.
What do you mean, like this?
Yeah, yeah. Just tuck
Oh,
it in.
here,
Yeah.
okay. You want me all the way in?
Yeah, this gets tucked in, all of it. All of this gets tucked straight in.
All right.
Like you go in like that. I mean, obviously I can't really do it.
Yeah.
Because you're a guy. There we go. And this would go here. This would, well, obviously this would be a bit more carefully done here. And then this comes around, right, like this. And then, here we are. And then if Cedric is feeling a little, you can do a twirl if you like.
I can do the twirl? Okay.
Again, if it's a cold day, he can do this.
All right.
Or if it's raining, he can do this. Or if he's going to the temple, he can do this. If he sees someone he doesn't want to see, he can do this. He can just, you know.
This is not, I don't see you guys anymore, so
No,
like I'm not
you
less
can
stressed out.
go like this and look on the ground and walk, still be walking.
Okay, so I can be a walker.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
if you happen to be carrying a child, and
Yeah, how would I do
if you
that?
were a woman and wanted to nurse the child, you could have the child here and still be nursing, right? And if you were a construction worker and you felt comfortable with your blouse, just lift your arms. You could tie it like this, it's the same garment. If you wanted a pair of pants, you could, I mean, this isn't exactly how it's done, obviously, but it's tied like a dhoti, and it's, instead of wrapping around, it's brought through the front, so that this part, the borders would come up like that.
Okay.
And it's all the same piece of fabric.
Wow. I feel beautiful.
Sari and how Bharti is using it. I mean, the last thought I had on her use of the sari is, for me personally, because I grew up in a household where there was a woman who wore a sari pretty much every day, the saris that are coated with shellac feel very kind of frozen, almost dead to me. Because for me, my mom's sari was always flowing, and I was always getting into trouble because when I wanted her attention, I'd pull it and the pleats would come out. So I got into trouble a lot for that. So to me, this one is interesting because there's no shellac on it. So maybe there's part of this story that's still more mutable. It's a possible interpretation. But I really appreciate your attention. You've been a great audience. Thank you again for coming, and thank you, Sandra.
Thank you very much.
Le sari et le serpent. Le sari est un matériel que Bharti Kher utilise beaucoup dans son travail. Bharti Kher a grandi à Londres, où est-ce que son père travaillait dans l'industrie de textile pendant que sa mère était couturière. Bharti Kher est une artiste féministe. Ses œuvres sont profondément féminines. Elle cherche souvent à explorer et à exposer les rôles différents que les femmes portent. Ici, avec le cloud walker ou la marcheuse sous les nuages, le sari, trempé dans la résine, sort de son sacrum. Il fait le tour de son corps en passant par le râteau et la pierre de lingam sous sa tête, et il se termine dans sa main droite en point serré. La manière que le sari enrobe le corps nous fait rappeler au mouvement spiral d'un serpent, qui fait aussi un lien avec le serpent de Kundalini. Le Kundalini est un thème sanskrit relié au yoga. Il s'agit d'une forme d'énergie spirituelle. Cette énergie est endormie ou en repos chez les gens ordinaires. Le Kundalini est souvent représenté en tant qu'un serpent, roulé 3 fois et demi sur lui-même. Il se trouve à la base de la colonne vertébrale, ou chakra racine, le Muladhara. Il est possible de réveiller l'énergie de Kundalini avec la méditation profonde. Le réveil de Kundalini mène à la réalisation de soi, le bonheur et l'harmonie parfaite. Bharti Kher utilise beaucoup le bindi ou motif de serpent. Le bindi ou motif de serpent est relié à la fertilité et à la fécondité. Comme le sari, le bindi est seulement porté par les femmes. Donc, on peut constater que le bindi et le sari, ce sont 2 matériaux que Bharti Kher utilise un peu en tant qu'un véhicule pour exprimer, pour élaborer et pour communiquer ses idées. La marcheuse sur le nuage a été moulée à partir d'une amie de Bharti Kher. C'est une amie qui a beaucoup de respect et d'admiration pour. C'est une adepte de yoga. Quand on peut voir de sa posture, cette statue démontre une flexibilité et une force physique. La marcheuse sur le nuage est la personnification de la force spirituelle et de la force physique, avec une détermination et une ténacité incroyables. Mais pourtant, on sent qu'il y a une forme de colère qui se dégage d'elle, une colère profonde, une colère assimilée, une colère calme. C'est une manière de dénoncer l'inégalité entre les sexes, la répression sexuelle et les rôles traditionnels que les femmes jouent dans la société. La pierre de lingam. Sous la tête de la marcheuse sous le nuage, on y retrouve une grande pierre de lingam. Les pierres de lingam sont des fois appelées les Shiva lingam. Ce sont les personnifications de Shiva. Les pierres de lingam viennent de la rivière de Narmada, qui se trouve dans la région montagneuse ou centre-ouest de l'Inde. Ce sont des pierres formées naturellement par le courant et le débit de la rivière. On peut seulement aller les chercher durant la saison sèche de l'année, lorsque le niveau de la rivière est à son plus bas. Le lieu de la provenance de pierre de lingam est une de 7 destinations sacrées pour les pèlerinages hindous. Bharti Kher s'intéresse beaucoup à l'alchimie, autant le concept et le processus. Les pierres de lingam ont une composition minérale assez alchimique. Ce sont des cryptocristallines dont on y retrouve une variété de jaspe, d'agate, de cristaux, de quartz et de basalte, et aussi de l'oxyde de fer au niveau de la couleur. Sa composition minérale fait que la pierre a un champ de vibratoire très élevé, donc c'est un générateur d'énergie puissant qu'on utilise beaucoup en lithothérapie. La pierre de lingam signifie l'unité d'origine. Quelque chose se fait d'elle-même. Sa forme phallique représente l'énergie masculine. Sa couleur et son graphisme représentent l'énergie féminine. Ensemble, c'est la fusion des oppositions qui crée l'harmonie parfaite. On peut aussi faire le parallèle entre la pierre de lingam et la pierre philosophale alchimique. La pierre philosophale est une substance indispensable pour le processus de transmutation de métaux en or. Le râteau. La marcheuse sous le nuage tient un râteau dans sa main gauche. Le râteau ici fait référence au Trishula ou le trident de Shiva. Le trident est à la fois une arme d'infraction et de défense, qui indique que Shiva est l'être suprême de l'univers, qui a le pouvoir de créer, autant le pouvoir de détruire. Bharti Kher, c'est quelqu'un qui va souvent ressourcer ses matériaux chez des brocantes, marche-aux-puces, des bazars. Elle collectionne aussi des objets ready-made, des objets préfabriqués. Elle apprécie beaucoup les objets qui ont été travaillés ou fabriqués de manière artisanale, car on sent vraiment une histoire, on sent le travail, l'amour et l'énergie qui ont été investis dans ces objets-là. C'est quelqu'un qui s'intéresse beaucoup à la physicalité des matériaux et le mélange des matériaux. On peut constater qu'elle choisit ces matériaux avec grand soin. C'est un programme de matières premières en alchimie. Ce sont des choix très importants car c'est vraiment à partir de la matière première, à partir de ces matériaux, que l'œuvre, que la transformation prendra place. Bharti Kher travaille beaucoup avec le moulage en plâtre. Le moulage en plâtre en soi, c'est une technique très ancienne qui date des temps des Égyptiennes. Le plâtre est un composant naturel avec une très longue histoire. Et durant le processus de moulage, le plâtre réchauffe la peau à cause d'une réaction chimique. Et on pourrait dire qu'il y a une partie de l'essence ou de l'énergie du sujet moulé qui a été transférée dans le plâtre et figée dans le moule. C'est une forme de transfert d'énergie, de transmutation. Bharti Kher s'intéresse beaucoup aux mémoires corporelles et aux expériences vécues dans le corps et comment ces mémoires, ces expériences habitent dans la peau. Pour elle, tout se ramène toujours vers le corps, car c'est vraiment l'engagement de notre être physique dans l'espace qui l'intéresse. Ici, nous avons une statue de Shiva dansant. Le Shiva est le dieu de la destruction, de l'illusion et de l'ignorance. Il représente la naissance, la mort et la renaissance. Shiva est aussi homologue masculin des déesses Durga et Kali. Ce sont des déesses terrifiantes associées au pouvoir de destruction et de création. La marcheuse sur le nuage évoque les dakinis. Les dakinis sont une espèce de démon femelle en hindouisme ou de divinité féminin en bouddhisme tantrique. Le dakini signifie celle qui traverse l'espace ou la danseuse du ciel. Les dakinis sont souvent représentés en tant qu'une jeune femme nue, dansante, avec une guirlande faite de crânes humains. Elle danse sur le cadavre de l'ignorance et de l'orgueil. Dans ses mains, on retrouve un trident qui nous rappelle le trident de Shiva, un couteau racloir qui est un outil avec une lame très tranchante qu'on utilise pour séparer la chair des os, et un coupe-crâne. Il s'agit d'un coupe à boire fait avec un crâne humain. Sa nudité reflète l'état naturel et sauvage. Et ses accessoires nous fait penser à la déesse de Kali et Durga, avec lesquelles elle est souvent associée. Les dakinis sont la matérialisation de la force spirituelle féminine. Elle représente l'énergie et toutes ses fonctions. Pour Bharti Kher, le dakini signifie vraiment la possibilité de transformation. La marcheuse sur le nuage fait partie d'un plus grand projet où Bharti Kher fait plusieurs déesses sur une période d'une 12aine d'années. Éventuellement, elle voudrait toutes les présenter ensemble, comme présenter un panthéon au complet. Merci. Moi aussi, je collectionne beaucoup les objets, un peu comme Bharti Kher, de marche-opus, de basalte, de n'importe où. Et j'apprécie vraiment cet aspect que lorsque les objets ont une histoire ou qui ont été fabriqués de manière artisanale. Fait qu'ici, il y a des objets qui font partie de ma collection, tandis que d'autres ont été achetés ou empruntés spécifiquement pour la présentation.
Est-ce que vous vous intéressiez avant à l'hindouisme ou c'est nouveau?
Je ne suis pas une spécialiste en hindouisme, mais j'ai pratiqué yoga pendant plusieurs années. Puis quand je dis yoga, souvent on associe yoga aux asanas seulement en tant qu'exercice physique. Et pour moi, yoga, c'est vraiment plus que ça. Donc, c'est une pratique spirituelle. Mais j'ai quand même étudié beaucoup pour la présentation. Oui.
Yes?
Yes, you were talking about the inner racism.
Yes.
I was wondering when you had this turning point and when you start to actually speak about it, or sharing your story or being a change.
In public, you mean?
Yeah.
I never really did that. It's the first time I've done that. But I think that the scars of that, take a long time to unravel. I think I think what I would say now, like I grew up very much in an Afro-Asian community. My parents were part of the generation that was part of a large wave of immigration from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, combined at the same time with a large wave of immigration from Jamaica and Trinidad to Britain. And the community that I grew up in, therefore, was actually really diverse. In the end, right? I mean, initially, my parents were the first hard part of the wave. But, when I look back on it now, I think that's what's kind of so startling to me about it is, the only kids that got beaten up as much as all of us, as the Afro-Caribbeans and the Indian kids, were the Irish, right? Because this was during the IRA battles that were going, it was called the Troubles, right? During all the IRA bombings on mainland Britain. But in terms of how or when I started to, I can only tell you it took a long time. I mean, I was an adult for many years before I really started to understand how this had affected me. And I think part of the reason for that was because, and I know this happens to people of other backgrounds and other contexts as well, is because it was overlaid with so much physical violence. Like there were stabbings, houses got firebombed. There was a lot of stuff like this that went on. And it wasn't, I think because when we immigrated to Montreal, I was 12 years old, so it was kind of this giant break with that. It really took a long time. I couldn't really tell you exactly when. I know that doesn't really answer your question, but I think, you know, I know for a certain period of my life, certainly in my early 20s, I really identified a lot with some of the writings of black writers like James Baldwin. I read a lot of his stuff. I remember the first time I read Malcolm X's autobiography. Part of that too was because I was part of the anti-apartheid movement at university at that time at Concordia. And so you know, learning about those experiences in other communities of color really helped inform me about what I had experienced and how it might have affected me. And as I say, unraveling it just took a long time. And I think also because, you know, again, for a lot of communities of color, depending on where you are and what your experience is, you do get alienated from your parents. You know, you don't really understand, because you're part of a generation that was born in a place, you feel a certain level, like I mean, I am British, right? So, but my parents never felt British, even though they lived there for almost 20 years. They always felt at some level like outsiders. They never had British passports. You know, like, I mean, so there are layers to that, right? I mean, I'm middle-aged now, and I mean, I feel it's relatively recently that I feel I'm at the end of that unraveling. So it really took a very long time. And I think part of it for me, and I would encourage anybody else who has been affected in this way, you have to really develop a lot of self-compassion. You know, to forgive yourself for some of the choices and the thoughts you had, the ways you felt about certain people in your family, or certain experiences you had, or in my case it was clothing, and it got, I mean, I remember as a child we had to go to Christian services at school, so because my parents, for whatever reason, didn't have time or never thought to instruct me in the religion I was born into, you know, there's still so many pieces of that I don't understand, right? So, again, because my father was separated from us, a lot of racism was directed at him because he always wore a turban, but he was absolutely adamant. Like I mean, he's been dead for many years now, but that was one part of who he was that he was unwilling to let go of, or unwilling to change. And I mean, I don't want to take up too much time with this, but I think it's really important for anybody who experiences this, you know, an internalized form of discrimination, whether it's sexism or homophobia or whatever it is. It's really important at some point in your life to give yourself, you know, it's when you're able to love yourself enough to understand how you could possibly have felt this way that you start to heal. You know, because you've unlocked a little, you know, this horrible room here where you can understand as a child or as a teenager or in your early 20s, you, for whatever reason, didn't have the tools to understand how this all happened, you know? Like, that's what I had to learn, but it took a long time. It really took a long time.
Biologist, hi. I was wondering, you were talking about the noises that actually stop whale from communicating. What kind of noise are you talking about?
So that's an interesting question, because it really depends on the species. So different species of whales will communicate at different frequencies. We're probably all familiar with dolphins making a lot of ultrasound and a lot of high-pitched clicks and things like that. So their frequencies that they use are more disturbed or distorted by commercial traffic, boats, motor boats, that sort of thing. You get into the large whales, though, like blue whales, fin whales, sei whales that use infrasound, or frequencies that are extremely low, certainly below our hearing. We're talking about 10 hertz, 10, 15 hertz as a fundamental frequency. So if any sound was heard, like if we could hear it, we're picking up harmonics, or we've used special equipment to manipulate it and bring it into a range we can hear with hydrophones. So that's not affected by commercial traffic whatsoever. They have no problem with that. And that kind of low frequency travels very far. And I should have mentioned, sound in water travels a lot faster than sound in air. So you have not only an animal that is capable of communicating vast distances, but very quickly. So going across the ocean just like that, you know, it's not a long time at all. Maybe not quite like that. What are the masking factors there? We're looking at infrasonic sonar. We're looking at mining, deep sea mining, oil rigs, exploration booms, that sort of thing. And not only do they cause mass, I mean, even natural seismic activity, volcanic activity will also mask, but it's infrequent compared to what we're generating now, and particularly where it's being generated. And the fact that it's the same thing, it's low frequency, it travels very fast across the ocean, and it travels a long way. So it can have a masking potential a long way too. It's a very complex phenomenon communicating in water. And it has a lot to do with where you are in the water column and temperature and so forth.
And what are the whales communicating when you reach out? Like, what are you talking about? Are they basically like to go somewhere? Or
you know, I don't think anybody knows. They have, but we do know is it's mostly the males that are doing these long distance calls. So it's very likely to say, I'm here. Hey, I'm here. Come find me. There are other calls that are made that are more around foraging and contact, and certainly there are vocalizations between mother and offspring. And they also will have slightly different frequencies, so they're still very low. But so we suspect that they're being used in courtship scenarios, in announcing travel in space and communicating with conspecifics as to where their whereabouts are. So blue whales are known to be rather solitary. You don't see them in groups, but that in part I think may be a product of the fact that they don't have to be in groups to still communicate. So your group may be, there still may be group cohesion or cohesion between siblings, for instance, from the last several births of a female. But they don't have to be in close proximity. What they have to do is recognize the vocalizations.
So basically maybe a lengthy group or just long distance group, right?
Yes, exactly. We're having to rethink about what a group actually is and it's spatially.
Right.
And that's the thing. And once you get your mind around that, then it starts to make the way we analyze the movements and activities of the big whale, the rorquals, in a different light.
And